thank you everybody for coming, especially it's so great to see people that we've met this week or that we've worked with. And so just to say, as we have our panel discussion today, it's really open-ended, so if you have a follow-up question or want to bring something to the forefront, just let's keep it really kind of in the moment and just do that as we come. I'm just going to give a very brief overview of Artitol and then hand it over to our panelists and to you all, and of course, after the talk, if you have any questions more about Artitol or about the exhibition, we're here. So in 2020, myself, Sim Lutton from Arts Project Australia, and Jennifer Gilbert from the Jennifer Lauren Gallery, with thanks to guidance and advocacy from Katrina Schwartz, we started having these conversations about how to make the art world more accessible and inclusive, especially for artists that identify as neurodivergent and intellectually and learning disabled. And then specifically, because it was during COVID and we're looking online and discussing everything online, we started thinking about how can we use this tool of being digital as an asset as opposed to it being something that is restrictive. So we started to just think about Artitol, and really look at how we could use digital and virtual collaboration as a platform. Also, what we wanted to do is we wanted to continue on work that we were all doing individually with supported studios. So, Artitol came about with some initial funding from the ASOP Foundation, the Australian Council for the Arts, and shortly thereafter from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade from Australia, and from the British Council. With Artitol, what we're trying to do is we have 4 strands, and actually Billy, who we'll discuss in a minute, he's part of our steering committee. And one of the things the steering committee mentioned was that it'd be great to have some sort of visual map to explain everything that Artitol does. So, if anyone is...
Have
you not seen them all?
Yeah, I mean, after our last meeting, I thought we renamed the piece of mind map Slominski, and you did the business.
Full disclosure, mine looked much messier than this, and then we handed it over to a professional designer and got this much better version. But everybody has a copy of our broadsheet, and that has a visual map of everything that Artitol does, which we focus on peer-to-peer collaborations. This first year has been very focused on collaborations between artists with and without disabilities and internationally. One artist based in Australia and one artist based in the UK. We also commission writing. So in the first year, we've been able to commission writing by writers such as Jennifer Higgy and Francesca Gavin to write about artists in studios, really elevating their practices. We also started implementing a curatorial mentorship, and then also an initiative called Curating Collections, where we pair an artist working from a supported studio with a public or private collection to curate a digital project, which you'll hear more about in a minute. And lastly, inclusivity and access is really important to us. So on the platform, we try to make it as accessible as possible, offering BSL options and audio options, easy reads. While on the other hand, we're also really interested in being a platform for the wider art world and arts professional who are interested in discovering and learning about new voices and new artists and the amazing artwork that's coming from supported studios. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists by name, and then if they are up for just saying a few words on the project that you guys have done with Artitol this year, that would be great. So we'll start with Cherelle Sappleton.
Hello. On the spot, I didn't know that I was going to go first.
Oh, sorry, okay.
I
can give a preface if you want.
No,
okay.
I think I'm good. Yes, so I was very lucky and fortunate enough to be paired with Tom Roberts, an Australian artist who, by all accounts, is kind of setting the world alight with his incredible drawings and paintings, quite rightly so. And what was so brilliant about the whole process, I think, was that I was actually quite nervous about being paired with another artist whose practice I had no idea about. I was kind of just in the hands of Artitol to do the pairing. And so I was really thinking, before I found out about who the artist was going to be, I was thinking, like, what if their practice is like really technical? And they've got this incredible, I don't know, like engineering thing, and I just kind of cut and stick images together. Like, how is that going to work? But what was brilliant and beautiful was that Artitol really saw the synergies within our practices. So from that moment of being introduced, it was just really easy. It was really easy. I felt really supported. All the language, I've mentioned this before, but the language, even in the contract, like things like that kind of ideology of care and understanding that different people work in different ways, and this is a new space for everyone involved, and so being really mindful about managing those relationships and feeling as though you can raise your hand and say, actually, I'm not quite sure about this, or actually, I don't really work that way. It's just, it just takes such a load off, and I really feel like that's, I feel lucky to have been a part of it, but it really does feel like that should just be the mode going forward for everyone. So yeah, this is the kind of colourful collage digital print work is the outcome of the kind of exchange that Tom and I were kind of in the midst of, I suppose. It kind of was like, it felt really quick. Everything felt really quick, like, and easy. Getting to know his practice has just sort of germinated a whole set of new things that I thought that I'd closed the door on, which is really interesting. I was just saying to Lisa now, I have been aware of a few supported London studios just because I used to work at a gallery who have had previous links with Submit to Love and with Action Space, so I've been quite lucky in that way. But what's been really eye-opening is really seeing the kind of network worldwide through this project and being introduced to so many incredible practices and just across the board being inspired in that way.
Because Cherelle's, the artist that Cherelle worked with was Tom Robertson. So he works from a supported studio, Studio A in Sydney. Before John discusses his collaboration, because they're different, so it's nice to see the ways Cherelle and Tom developed a way of working where they sent Zoom messages to video messages to each other, giving studio visits.
Because the time difference, so it didn't quite work out. That was a little bit of a challenge.
So they would sort of leave each other questions and give little tours of each other's studios, and then began exchanging imagery digitally that then they were sort of layering on top of one another.
Yeah.
And who is Woody Tiger?
Yeah, so in some ways the time difference was great because we couldn't have that straightforward conversation. So Woody Tiger was introduced to me as just the name Woody Tiger in one of Tom's very first videos, and from that moment I was just like obsessed. Who is Woody Tiger? And it felt like forever. I didn't get an answer until the very end, where it turns out Woody Tiger is one of Tom's very best, closest friends who works at Studio A and who facilitates kind of his practice is kind of part of his development with the studio. So I'm really glad that that's been ticked up. But I still am there's something about the name Woody Tiger. I'm just really satisfying.
Do you think we've all got our own Woody Tiger?
Yeah, Woody Tiger is his spirit animal.
Yeah.
Woody Tiger isn't Woody Tiger. Woody Tiger is out there.
Thank you. So, and then just say, the works from the peer-to-peer that are on display here, these are sort of edited versions of the larger projects, which you can visit the platform and see some of the videos and the kind of larger exchanges. Thank you. And then I'll introduce John Powell-Jones, who did another peer-to-peer with us. It would be great just to hear a little bit more, and we can point as needed to your amazing project.
so I'm John. I worked with an artist called Matt Robertson who is with Augusto in Australia. And we got paired together, I think, because we both work a lot with characters. And I guess like world building in a sense that we create an environment and then populate it with these characters that maybe represent different things to us. So we initially met up and were discussing about how we could collaborate by introducing our characters to each other, and how we could like facilitate a space where they could like meet each other essentially. So then we started working on this process of I don't know if you know the game Consequences, so you would write something or draw something, fold it over, give it to someone else, and they start the next part of that story or character or whatever it is. We started with that kind of concept where each week we would draw characters and a setting, and then they would be sent to me and I would get Matt's setting or environment and Matt's characters, and then I'd have my environment and my characters, and I would overlay them into each other. So we kind of had this split universe thing going on. So like they meet and then they both inhabit each other's worlds, and then it kind of like string theory, I guess, like splits, and then you've got these two conversations going on that are linked but also separate. So then it was a really interesting way of working. I've never worked like that before with someone else, where you kind of don't know where it's going to go, and you only have a certain amount of control over it yourself because the other person can bring something completely different to it. So as well as the environments and the characters, each week we would ask each other questions as well. So then the characters kind of went on this self-evolving journey with each other, where they were trying to find out a little bit more about each other, as me and Matt were trying to find out more about each other as well. So I guess like the characters were kind of like a loose reflection of ourselves and how we were meeting, but then they became like, you know, existing in their own worlds as well and finding out about each other and the worlds that they live in. And then that kind of developed into this comic strip that's on the back wall over there. So it's the same conversation represented across two worlds. So yeah, them finding out about each other, discussing where they live, how they live, and then becoming pals essentially. But yeah, it was lovely. It was a really great project to work on. I guess like very similar experience, and it felt very supported, and it felt very, I guess, stress-free. It was something that I like quickly found it becoming like the real highlight of my week. That this idea of like, oh, not only like get to hang out via Zoom again, but also like that surprise of seeing what Matt had produced that week. And how that would fit together. So yeah, it was quite a unique experience really for me that I've had, in the sense that it just felt like very easy and very enjoyable, and then really happy with the outcome at the end of it as well. So yeah, it was a great project.
And you guys did, you powered through the time difference, right?
Yeah.
You guys would,
Yeah, so it was 8 a.m. I think for us. Was it 8 a.m.?
I think I was still in my pyjamas.
Yeah. And then 7.
In bed.
7 a.m. for them.
Yes.
But yeah, it's just saying before, it did feel sometimes on a Sunday night, that feeling of having homework at the end.
It was that moment where you'd be like, I'm sorry, I've only drawn one background, not two this week. Don't shoot me.
Yeah, and like, I guess like, because Matt was so prolific as well, that like he was, yeah. But apart, joke about it. It wasn't like an actual real stress, I guess. But yeah, so it was that time difference was quite. I guess like initially it felt like, oh, how's this going to work? But then I think it really added to the project because I think we wouldn't have got this outcome if we were then meeting up every week and trying to figure out where the story was going. I think it really benefited from having that space. So like there's a week in between of trying to figure out what the answers to the questions were going to be, what environment was coming next. And, yeah.
It was nice as well because Matt in Australia was a little bit hesitant at first, wasn't he? Because he was like, John's work's a bit scary and I'm not sure about it. But then when he got to know more about your characters, and actually he realised that they weren't scary and they were very similar to how he thinks and his experiences of the world, it like really worked beautifully together. But there's that moment of, I don't know, John, you know, look at the characters, they've got spiky bits, or I don't know about this.
I think like the first conversation, one of the things he was like, just getting out there, I don't like horror. I was like, that's fine.
Just in case you're wondering.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I was going to say, both of you have mentioned like the supported idea that you've got good support, and I've reflected on this, and I thought, you know, is this? And you both said how easy you felt it was. But do you think that's there's something in that the support you got from Artitol, or the kind of the dating agency role that they played in the process was actually, you know, key to it, to enabling that, because otherwise you might have been dwelling on these in your head and it might have been less expressive artistically.
It's definitely, I think it's something that appeared to me to be woven so thoughtfully and carefully right from the beginning. So, yeah, definitely. I think it's, you know, it's, what would be the word? I think it's telling that both of us have mentioned how easy it is. So what has not been easy in previous encounters with other organisations, and you know, I think there's definitely some small things that could be implemented to make projects, like art projects and art commissions, feel supported. But it goes, you know, it's just a human kind of look at how do we interact and how can we create together. Just because it's, you know, we're the artists doesn't mean that it's not it's a whole holistic kind of creative endeavour, right? So people facilitating that are in that process. So it really is crucial that we have this human element of like understanding relationships, understanding how people work, how differently people work, what small things can be put into the bedrock of like building these relationships that can make things really fruitful and beautiful and enjoyable, and high quality as well. Get the most out of people. But yeah, and yeah, I think the digital was not an obstacle because of all of this other background work, whereas it really easily could have been. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah.
We were speaking to one of the studios, because I know that also with the time changes and with working with artist facilitators and everything, it can be a lot of work to do these collaborations. But then exactly one of the point of Artitol is that we're trying to exactly use this digital connection as a great access point and as a really positive thing that gives artists an opportunity to connect internationally, you know, as opposed to it just being something that got us through COVID.
And I wonder also, because Lisa and Jen and I have talked a lot about this, in setting up the peer-to-peer, there's a structure, like there's a framework there to work within, but there's not a specific outcome to what that peer-to-peer will result in, because it depends on how the artists come together, how they communicate. And so I guess there's inbuilt in that a sense of trust, you know, that you are professional artists, you're working with professional artists from supported studios, and there's the permission within that to also make mistakes, and, you know, and to have enough flexibility that if something's sort of go off track that way and explore it because there is good trust there, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. I think like it was for me that idea of like not a lot of pressure. So it was like we have paired you up because we think it would be great for you two people to meet. That was first and foremost, and then it would be great for you two to chat about like. But there wasn't the idea of, and now we expect this, and this from, which can sometimes, I think, in my experience, stifle a project, because then you've got that worry of like, I may be underperforming or like whatever it is. Whereas with that, it was much more about, I guess, just having the space to just allow something to, just to see where it goes, basically, without that pressure of like, oh, we're like running behind on getting X amount of work done for that amount.
And yet your outcome with Matt was quite polished in the end. Like it's very, like it's so
I cracked the whip.
beautifully-
I didn't.
You know, whereas Emily and Sandra very much took such a different approach to their peer-to-peer that was responding to different themes week on week. But it's just very interesting that within the same framework, such different outcomes have happened with the project.
So I will now, before we sort of open up sort of larger discussions a little bit about the virtual, I'm going to introduce Billy, who he has worked on for Artitol, shifting gears away from the peer-to-peer, are curating collections. Billy is an artist with Submit to Love in Dalston, so I will let you explain a little bit about the project and your experience.
Submit to Love supported studio in Livingston, East London, part of the Headway East London, which is an organisation that supports people affected by brain injury. I've been a member there for 9 years, I think. Yes, 9 years now. Keep forgetting all the time. So
You're looking over at Alex for a yay or nay.
as if she would I've been there longer than Alex. Anyway, so yes, Artitol, I sit on the UK steering group for Artitol, and I was asked to do this curating collection. And as I mentioned before, a bit like a senior front on the floor, the young person
It's
standing.
recording you.
Oh, are you? Yeah, so as I say, it's a bit like a dating agency. Who are you going to team? And so I got teamed up with Monash University Museum of Art in Melbourne, and Tim's looking at Katrina for a reason.
I'm looking at Kimberly
Oh,
in
are you?
the back
Oh,
there,
no,
who used to work at Monash.
Oh, are you?
But not when we were working on the
Oh,
project, Billy.
no. Okay. I'll say it. I'll be all right. No, that's good. So long as I'm. Anyway, so I got teamed up with them, and they showed me. Well, I'd seen parts of their fantastic. I think there's about 2,500 pieces in their collection. It's a university collection, post 1960s, so it's mostly contemporary art, but it's all Australian. It's all Australian art of all kinds. So there isn't much that you can't, from Australia that you can't see in this collection. And so I looked at it, and it was just mind-blowing. I just completely felt at home right away in this collection. And so putting together a collection of, like, in the end, how many did you end?
24.
24 images. It was really quite hard. And, I was really saddened to leave some of them out. But eventually I did, and I linked it the way because I'm thinking, like, how do I talk about this collection now, other than trying to sound intellectual, which I'm not. So I linked it to a 1997 camping trip I did in Australia with my wife Jane. Is she here? Yes. She'll be able to tell you all of that. So in 1997 we did a camping trip with two friends in Australia, and we went right down the middle of Australia and then round to, so I better go that way, round to Melbourne and Sydney. So it was down the middle and round to Sydney, round Melbourne, Sydney. So I linked it to all my first impressions of Australia, this faraway land that you've only ever heard about. I only ever heard about it in a TV program called Skippy when I was very young. Does anyone remember Skippy, the bush kangaroo? His famous detective kangaroo. Cherelle Sappleton. Kangaroo detectives. Oh, yeah. So I linked it to this camping trip and sort of all the impressions of the landscape, the environment and everything. I linked it to pictures and I wrote a kind of brief sort of essay and sent it over to the everybody at Monash. Well, who was it? It was
Mooma.
Mooma.
Yeah.
Can I say Mooma?
Yeah.
I don't like using acronyms. Anyway, so I sent it to them, and they responded to it and looked at their collection and said, "Oh, what about your thoughts about this? And you thought about that? Thought about this?" And so they drew out loads of more images. So we went through hundreds of images, and I eventually managed to pin it down to 24. And so that is what is in the digital collection, and that's what you'll be able to see. And all I can say is thank you very much to Artitol for putting us together, and to Mooma for being so generous. Because as soon as I pitched this idea of I'm going to write about my camping trip, and your pictures are going to illustrate it, I thought
It's a very entertaining story.
I thought they're going to say no. They're going to say no chance, mate. But they didn't, and so that was. So I got away with it. Anyway.
So where can you see them? On the Artitol website?
In about a week.
Billy's project is to be released soon.
Yeah, that's it. Coming soon.
Coming very soon. And then just to speak briefly to the curating collection in the same way that John and Cherelle mentioned these sort of different outcomes. Billy will be our second completed curating collections, and again, it's really interesting to see the different approaches the artists take. So our first one was an artist, Michael Kamakaris from Arts Project Australia, and he worked with Cranford Collection, which is a private collection here in the UK. And his approach was more looking at connectedness during COVID. He also selected around 20 works, but divided it up into 3 categories: connectedness, humanness, and I can't remember the third one off the top of my head, but he had sort of an environment, curated it into 3 sections, and then his thoughts were very much about having conversations with the curator, Anne Puntney, discussing how his selection process was very much scale didn't matter. Everything is this size. Where for Anne, who curates it physically, scale makes a big difference. So then they were also talking about this difference of accessing work digitally and physically. Where Billy exactly did this great narration about with works reflected off of his journey. So it's just great to see the different approaches.
It was just great fun. It was a dream project. I mean, as I say, I don't believe we could have got away with it at all, but I did. So here we are. It was fantastic. Thank you, Artitol.
Our pleasure. So I was going to ask the panelists kind of some larger questions about connecting during COVIDness, but I just thought before we do, if anyone had an initial question, feel free.
Yeah. Is there something from your experience in this project at any point? Could you identify one thing that you might take forward into future collaborative work, or that you hope that will be present in future collaborative work? And that's for each of the panelists.
Don't look at me.
Go for it, Billy.
I think that sounds good.
No, it's actually what I mentioned before. I'm both John and Cherelle were talking about the idea that part of the stress of thinking about it too much. Don't think about it too much, and the things that they're going to drag you away from the thing that you really should be doing. So really, that is the key. It's a type of working, and I think we talked about the meaning of the word collaboration and the meaning of the words co-production and other things like that. And it's how you work is important. How you work together. So that's the thing that we've got. Everybody's got to do a lot more thinking about that, because the ways we've been working together in the past just don't work anymore.
Yeah, it's funny actually, because I hadn't really done very much collaboration in terms of my visual art practice at all up until the peer-to-peer project. And then after the peer-to-peer project, it's just collaboration central. So I think something has been unlocked and which is really exciting. So yesterday, me and Alicia have been sort of having these conversations about. I have a sound therapy sort of practice. Alicia's coming from a shamanic practice background, so we're kind of working together. And we did our first thing yesterday. But that's that's been like a long conversation, and we're friends before that. So it has felt very kind of like it's fine, we're friends. There's a kind of pre-existing relationship there. But I think with the peer-to-peer collaboration, the way that I see collaboration has felt. I think that it's taken the pressure out of it. I think just the process of kind of let's meet and get to know, and then trust that something will happen out of these conversations, and it doesn't necessarily have to have a big shiny ribbon on it and be completely resolved. I think that's probably the theme that runs through lots of the things that I'm kind of currently working on and have worked on since peer-to-peer. So yeah, it's definitely it's had a really big impact on how I work.
I guess for me, something that I found quite different or beneficial from other projects was like chatting about briefly earlier where Matt at the beginning said I don't like horror. I guess in previous projects being quite reluctant to talk about the personal elements behind the production of the work or the meaning behind it for me, rather than say like the socio-political meaning of it, but like the actual personal meaning. And then I think opening up about that slightly with Matt allowed the project to, I guess like maybe like he trusted me a bit more or something, I don't know, but it allowed the project I think to develop in a way that maybe it couldn't have before. So I guess taking that from it, maybe just being a bit more open about the reasons behind the work or about my practice.
Can I ask a question related to that and collaborating digitally? It struck with your work there is a real integration of the worlds. So how did like the digital, in terms of like, was the digital collaboration in some ways, like, you know, we think of digital worlds as maybe being inaccessible, but was there something about enabling you to both get in each other's worlds in a closer way because it was digital? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I guess I think with digital, it depends where you're. It depends where you are within that world, I guess, because I think in some aspects, digital can be like really accessible because anybody. That takes away that, for me personally, that human stress of having to go somewhere, for example, or for having to be in somewhere with somebody discussing something and everything else that comes with that, like the journey getting there, how, like, I don't know, where the toilet's going to be, like whatever it is, it's all going on. Whereas if you strip that all away and it's like we're just working digitally, so you're in your studio somewhere that you feel comfortable in, whatever else, and you're just sharing this work, I think can make it like weirdly like much more accessible, even though you're completely separated from each other. So I found this especially in this project, like I felt that we had that one scheduled hour, you know exactly that that's when you're going to meet on the week, so you've got that timetable, you know when that's going to be. And then from that is up to you to figure out how you're going to develop it and put it together. But then you know wherever you're going with it, the next hour you've got that, the next week you've got that anchor to come back to. So you, even if you're not at a space where you've finished what you're working on, you're going to get some feedback, you're going to have a discussion.
How long did you, was the whole period that you met once a week?
Once a week for
2 months.
2 months? Yeah.
Just over 2 months.
So it was only 2 months.
Only maybe a bit longer. They both caught COVID during the time, so it was a nice experience. Nice to chat about that experience as well. Like, how did you feel? Well, I was feeling like this. How did you feel?
And I guess that's another thing actually, the COVID thing, that it's come like at a point of like a really weird time where you're kind of getting used to this idea of being separated. So again, having that scheduled 1 hour of like human interaction was like, I guess, come off the back of a very odd couple of years. So that in a way made it feel like more accessible than inaccessible in a way.
You were both in, I guess, like places where you feel safe. So he was always in his bedroom for the Zooms, wasn't he? And you're in your studio where you're surrounded by all these things that make you feel safe. So you were both in like safe environments when you were on the calls and feeling relaxed, and like there was no pressure to dress up or look in any way. It's just like, I'm here, this is what I'm in my pajamas, you're doing this, you're doing this. Like, it was a very relaxed setup that we had going on, and there was no pressure to do anything or...
And maybe because it is in COVID, coming back to what you said, Billy, about, you know, the ways that you access things and the way that we do things now and access arts projects, or the way that you set those things up can't be done the way that it always was. And perhaps this allows a space to say the way that collaboration looks, which might have looked a particular way, could be anyway. Really, you can make it happen whether you catch up on Zoom together or whether you send videos or packages or there's sort of many
Yeah, from a
ways to
digital
think
point of view,
about
I had not considered the kind of, I had not really looked at the flip book. I don't know whether anybody's seen flip books, but the flip book is what the curating collections uses. It's much like an art catalogue. You swipe your tablet and you basically go through this magazine look of the catalogue. And so that was not something I really sort of seen the power of. And it really is quite powerful. It's very kind of like close, and it puts the user in control, that they can flip back and forth. Because if you're working in magazines, I noticed when Jennifer picked the magazine up earlier, she kind of came to it from the back rather than the front. So in a flip book, the person who's using it is in complete control. And so you might have habits for magazines, but what are your habits for a flip book? And I think it's normally sequential. So anyway, I was just started to thinking about that, the power of that medium, which is a part way between what would look like and feel like a print thing, and it's totally digital. So that's another thing I took away from the experience.
That's on a platform called Issue?
Yeah, there are lots of different flipbook platforms you can buy, and I've seen some newspapers done like that as well, because you basically can then just tap into the story.
Well, I guess it's also with the Artitol site, as we think about the different ways to access things for every project, you want to be able to present it in a variety of ways so that people from all walks of life can access different parts of it, or all of it if they want to. And it might be through visuals, or it might be through publishing some of those videos that you took.
Yeah, I think thinking about, we had a digital conversation with a writer at one point about your thing, and I think we used the word digital residency, which I think was like a really, I think, succinct way to talk about almost all the collaborations, the writing, the curatorial mentorships, the curated collection, and the peer-to-peer, in the sense that it is digital, but it is like a residency in the sense that you can come and go, you can set your own structure, and the outcome, much like most artists in residencies are, where they're very open-ended. It's not looking for a specific, sort of outcome, or we might do a curating collections next year where a flip book isn't the right mode. Our curatorial mentorships, we've only completed one on our website. We worked with the curator Stella Sadelli, and she worked with an artist, Eden Menta, and through that process of working on how to curate a digital project online, we really wanted to facilitate, what Eden saw the project was, which ended up coming with a soundtrack. She found the Star Trek intro to be something that she goes to in the evenings as like a anxiety calming noise. So we, put that on the website for when visitors click onto the website. She also wanted to make sure there was an accessible drawing element. So on top of working with artists, we also had a live draw option, you know, so we really want to be there to facilitate, you know, what ideas are sort of coming, you know, to the foreground. I think we're also kind of curious to know from you guys if, in terms of your projects with Artitol and or kind of working digitally other during COVID, kind of plays into Katrina's question, but has it impacted your kind of creative practice at all, kind of going forward?
I was already working, trying to figure out ways of, I guess, explore digital more and integrate ways of working that didn't rely on like a physical space. So I'd already been developing for an exhibition I'd done last year. I'd spent a couple of years developing the characters from that exhibition into a interactive computer game that was freely accessible on a platform called Roblox. So this idea that you could go to a physical space and see the work, but also if you didn't want to go to that space, you could then like visit that world essentially and meet the characters by going to an alternative space online. So I've been really thinking about that and like how you could further develop that and like thinking about like I used to, well, still do, but was really into choose your own adventure games when I was younger. And then how those like platforms and modes were then adapted for like more digital, so like choose your own adventure but digitally and like on forums and what have you. And like bringing that element into an art practice. And I think it worked really well, those ideas like with Matt, because that was like essentially a choose your own adventure. And I think there is scope for that to be even like explored even further. Like, you know, there's no reason why what's on paper there couldn't be like a digital thing that you interact with online. So yeah, I think there was already like kind of ideas in there of like how to develop the digital element more, because the other side of my practice is very like the thing that I enjoy doing is very physical. It's very like relies a lot on like making and textures and colour and what have you.
We can see that with the Atmer.
Yeah, that character there. So like that's. But then I've also got like a very short attention span, so I will move from one process to another quite, you know, like have like a character, like a real life character being made, but then making that in a digital format or doing I don't know, like a ceramic piece of it or whatever it is. But yeah, I think this project, like there was already seeds there, but it definitely gave like room for them to like, I guess, be explored and develop more, which is something that I'm currently trying to figure out a way of developing more and more. I think that idea of a free platform for stories to develop that isn't, maybe you like set the world, put some lore, as in LORE, of like what happens in that world, but then people are invited to create their own characters to develop their own stories in that.
Drawing, like I said at the beginning, but it's really funny because well, not funny, but I still have a bit of a block about actually making time to draw. So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about drawing since this collaboration. Just because, I mean, Tom's drawings and paintings are just so good. They're so good. And I was already thinking about text anyway, and I've been thinking about sort of image text combinations and how I'm able to start drawing again, because when when I was a kid, I was drawing all the time on loads of different things, much to my mum's, you know, real hatred, really. I've lost that. Now I'm in a new job, and I'm facilitating workshops with young people, and drawing it seems to be like a really big thing that several young people really want to get into, which is really great, and I'm up for the challenge. But also there's this whole thing of like, I haven't drawn in ages. Like, am I any good? I'm supposed to be the knowledgeable one. Do I really know what I'm doing? So I don't know. I'm kind of caught in this sort of teacher, student, master, novice space at the moment, and even though I've come such a, you know, like I'm a professional artist, there's still, I would have thought by now I would have gotten to a point where like I would just embrace it, but there's definitely this kind of really funny thing it's just really I don't know, like
Imposter
syndrome, but also like that, the whole thing of getting it right, being good. If I was talking to myself, or I was talking to one of my, you know, like one of the young people that I work with, I'd just be like, I would just say, have a go. But I can't say that to myself. And that's just ridiculous. So,
But is that sort of a historic thing? In the training of artists in the past, drawing and getting it right in drawing was central. But now, it isn't at all about drawing. But perhaps we need to go beyond that. Art isn't just about film or other things, or collage. It's about drawing as well. But what we want to say, it's okay to not get it right.
Yeah, or just to make a mark and it not be, you know, like the most perfect thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be about rendering something as, you know, as true to how it appears in reality.
And what's important is how it feels, not how it is.
Exactly. And what's sort of maddening for me, and what I'm just learning as I'm here talking to you, is the resistance that I feel about getting it right, and knowing that it's not about getting it right. It's about just making time to do it. But even in that, that kind of like intellectually and what it feels like, there's a disconnect. So yeah, drawing and drawing for the sake of it, I really hope to embrace in my practice.
Yeah, digitally for me, it's, I mean, I use devices, I use an iPad, and I draw on my phone all the time. I have a stylus in my pocket now, and I don't start drawing at any particular time. But I don't kind of, I mean, I'm not really scared of machines. I am the person that will press the button and see what happens. What can happen? What can work? And so I'm fairly fearless. But I kind of, what I found during lockdown is I'm using the drawing to move on to the physical. So the drawing is the preparatory stage for me. So I will sketch things and I'll compose images that I like, and I'll keep working them through digitally. Then I will go, I've recently done a lot of stitch work, so I'm now creating patterns digitally that I will transfer, and I will create the physical thing then. So I kind of don't start, the physical side is not really the starting point for me. The digital side is the starting point. So that's where I go on my iPad and on my phone, really. That's what I do. The bigger thing that came out of the whole experience of lockdown for me was how the studio worked. My studio is a supported studio, and I'm a studio artist. So, and our studio sprang straight into action and recreated the studio environment online for us to do at home. So we had the home studio on Friday we had a home studio where we'd all gather together and tackle a structured project. On Thursday was the art cafe where we would all just hang out and do whatever we wanted to do. So we had kind of, the studio was very key in responding to the crisis to support its artists, and that to me was the biggest thing that came out of it, how well they did it.
That's interesting because, and this is on a tangent, but also working at a studio in Australia, Arts Project Australia did the same thing, and when you look at all the supported studios, in some shape or form, they seem to respond very quickly, and the idea that working digitally as being a barrier sort of fell away out of necessity, and this whole other world has opened up that's maybe also taken, and it has for a whole lot of other artists and arts professionals, and maybe it's just taken some of that barrier or fear away.
Were not online people anyway, but they were supported separately. They were people delivered materials to them and they supported them. But the studio responded very quickly and in ways you could not imagine, that you could not predict. But they were just so quick, and I thought, it's like, how did they do that? It was like a bit of magic, to be honest.
But what I would say, Billy, following from that, now we've come out of COVID, and that no longer happens. And I'm a bit sad about that. There's good things that we can do then.
What was the best thing then, Chris? What was your find? Home studio. In the time that everybody would take to do one image, Chris would do about 6, and he'd reel them off like a Bob Dylan sort of throwing them on the floor.
But you only had a short time to do images, and we did it for a year and a half every week or so. So by the end, you got into the habit of doing things quickly, and that was good.
So I'm aware that we have gone over time, I believe. So if anyone has any final question, or if everyone has a bit more time, we can pose one final question to the panel, which will be me then, I guess, which is your projects with Artitol. Has it changed any perceptions you may have had about disability and or had an effect how artists that identify as neurodivergent, learning, or intellectually disabled are positioned in the contemporary art world? Big question, maybe short answers.
I don't know very much about the contemporary art world anyway. I'm kind of just a fella who hangs out in an art studio and does a bit and, gets away with it. I don't really know what the contemporary art world is, to be honest. So.
Yeah, fine.
I was really lucky enough to, a couple of years ago, being involved in a project with an organisation called Venture Arts, and the whole focus of that project was discussing the idea of labels within the art world, specifically things like outsider, and the benefits and the barriers that provides. So I had spent like a long time thinking about that, and that kind of opened up an interest into that area that has like stood being so like when this opportunity arose, like it was a really exciting one to be able to, I guess, like get involved again in that kind of field. So yeah, it's something like I'm actively very interested in.
It hasn't changed my perception because like I mentioned before, I've worked sort of very kind of loosely with Submit to Love Studios. I have kind of worked more closely with Action Space more loosely in project artwork. So I've been aware of some UK brilliant supported studios, I'm kind of very fortunate to have been. But I think what's really unique about this project, well, what I see is unique anyway, is the curation aspect. So like and what's really important, and you know, sort of politically in that act of occupying that advocacy and activism space where we're artists. That's first and foremost. The work comes first, interest in practice comes first, and how that work comes to being is secondary. And you know, whether that artist is neurodivergent or you know has come from a supported studio, that is that's important, but the work is way more important. And I think, you know, from being involved with the Summertime Gallery, exhibition, that's what is exciting to me, is the pairing. So being able to be in conversation with artists who are very different to me, who have come from like you know, different part of the world, have a completely different kind of experience of the world and occupy it in a different way is refreshing, and that's art practice in its kind of, I don't know, like really amazing kind of, opening up conversations that I would never have had before and facilitating that conversation, which has been so rich.